any organisation works well when there's a comms person in the room when decisions are made. All I can envisage is, and this is conjecture, but I'm presuming there was a comms person there, they're there, everything's going, and then suddenly something was sort of either just stopped, and there was something that happened behind closed doors, presumably with this whole this game's not going to get out on time, blah blah blah, and I think there must have been a breakdown of communication between the people who have made the decision and then the people who are making the game and talking about the game. And I think since then, you say what the strategy is. I don't think there has been a strategy.
Welcome to FM Thoughts, a podcast about thoughts on Football Manager. I am JMThoughts, and I'm today with PokesFM. Hello.
Hey, it's great to see you, mate. It's great to see you. We're in not real life, but as in seeing you, not just audio.
Now in visual.
It's very exciting.
The podcast now has real faces and everything. This is your third time on the podcast. You had one proper episode. You came on briefly to help me with another episode, and now you're back for another interview.
Back. I'm paying a lot of money for this privilege, but it's worth every penny featuring on this. So I hope you're enjoying all the funds that you're getting from me.
I was going to ask you what your rider was, but instead you just sent me money and said this was an ad slot. So that's fine with me.
I'll take any work I can get that I'm paying for.
Have gone by many names over the years, and you were right back in the early days of Football Manager. You were worst Football Manager or something like that.
Yeah. Ironically, if I'd kept that name, I would have done really well with SEO this year because so many people typing it in. I would have done really well. But now I've changed my name, so I've missed out on that.
Then you were Pokes, streamed for a bit. You're a little bit kind of. We get special streams every now and again. But you're not kind of the most active. But what people may not know about you, may not know about me either, is we both work in the field of communications.
We do.
Do you want to give a little bit of background to that, and what you're happy to share with the world?
So I work for a non-for-profit in comms. I've been involved in comms how many years now? Goodness. I've worked for the same charity for 15 years. But I've been doing different roles. So comms I've been doing for at least 8 of those. So probably close to a decade worth of comms, I'd say. Yeah, and I thoroughly enjoy it. I actually really enjoy comms. A lot of people really hate it, but I actually really, really like it. But you can't. If you're in comms as well, aren't you? So you would know what it's like, where you can't help but notice good or bad comms wherever you go, and that's what you sign up to when you work in comms.
We're going to talk about today. You do a little bit of freelance now as well. Maybe you're kind of doing some of that.
Yeah, so I guess one of the reasons I haven't done much content from Football Manager wise is I'm sort of in the process of launching my own business. It's very much in the early stages of helping people with communications and that side of stuff as well. So venturing out on my own as well.
TikTok as well.
Well, yeah, that's because I'm not very good at gardening. But if I make videos about it, I can present myself as better than I am. So, but no, I've been thoroughly enjoying all the horticultural algorithms thrown my way in 2025. It's been wonderful.
Love that. I'm kind of in a similar situation. I've worked in comms for about a decade. One of my first jobs out of uni, believe it or not, was promoting Tony Jameson's Football Manager show, among others.
Was it? No way.
In the square of Lancaster University, handing out flyers for Football Manager Ruined My Life when I was first in the workforce.
That's amazing.
I've worked for a number of different charities since then, including on, actually, during COVID, quite a lot of sort of risk management type stuff, kind of proper sort of hard PR, reputational protection type work. And now I work for a charity, a conservation charity, in strategic comms-y type stuff as well. And I completely agree with your point. It's very hard not to notice when companies maybe aren't doing comms. So neither of us work in the gaming industry, but I do think there's a degree of, there's a lot of transferable skills. So I'm hoping that people will enjoy hearing a kind of semi-professional take on Sports Interactive's comms approach, or I'm going to level with you, Pokes, like lack of approach. I don't really.
Straight in.
I mean, let's go straight in for that. Like, do you think there's a strategy? They seem to sort of lurch from thing to thing. There must be. And like, just also to be clear, we're not like laying into the people who work for SI. We also know that sometimes when you're working on something, there are things behind the scenes that you don't know about.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might be really good at comms, but your CEO or your trustee board or whatever it may be may stop stuff. And so this isn't us saying that whoever is in charge of comms at Sports Interactive is terrible. It's more of a sort of, how have we got where we've got to, and maybe in our comfortable, cushy seats from the outside, how might we have done it differently, not knowing all of the hurdles that presumably are invisible to us. So I just wanted to get that early. We're not here sticking a knife in.
It's so true. We cannot know everything that's going on behind closed doors. I feel like we can make some really good educated guesses as to what's going on, like structurally, communicatively amongst that organisation at the minute, particularly with the fact they've got SI and they've got Sega. You know what I mean? There's multiple stakeholders involved, and so I think we could probably make some reasonably good guesses what could be going on and how maybe some of the people, particularly the comms people, may be experiencing their working life over the last year or two at SI.
I think it's been pleasant, would be my guess.
You just can't.
Yeah, I mean, if we look back at the last 18 months, what do you think their approach has been?
I think there has been a big shift, and the last 18 months has been the kind of bumpy road through that shift. Whether they've purposely gone for this shift or not, it's hit them. And yes, and so in order to paint the picture of what I think it's at now, just briefly on what it was before, I think if we were to look back 2-3 years ago, and really all the way back from to the beginning of Football Manager, everyone would say how open, transparent, truthful, kind of sort of put everything out there Sports Interactive have been.
I think in COVID they definitely went through that route, where they were, with the Athletic podcast, and you had multiple members of Sports Interactive on that podcast, and it was a shift. I think maybe before that it was a little quiet, and then they went into this phase of opening out, and then, as you've kind of alluded to,
something
panicked, and
there's clearly been a shift. Everything from, the fact there was complete silence of social media posts in that period of time. I can't remember what the last one would have been. Something like, they're delaying the game. Is that right? Maybe like they're going to delay the game, and then nothing.
Well, must have been a directive that they decided, whether that came from Miles, whether it came from a head of comms, whether it came from Sega or some kind of consultant. Somebody said, say nothing, and they said nothing for 6 months. My opinion is that was really stupid. But that was obviously the strategy that they took. I have someone in my Discord who also kind of works in comms, but in really more kind of serious reputational damage space. And he was like, oh, that's good advice. If you've got anything to say, don't say anything. My world is much more about like stakeholder relationships. And when the charity I worked for went through a crisis and it had to lay off staff and all sorts of stuff, we were like constant comms. It's about being transparent. It's about identifying 100%. Who are the people here, Zealand, who can take the narrative from you if you don't say anything. And I think we've really seen that. They've not. I don't think they've identified who their key stakeholders are and primed them, and they've allowed the message to be completely taken away from them.
And any organisation works well when there's a comms person in the room when decisions are made. So if a decision's being made about strategic direction in any way, and in SA's thing, that's presumably what's going on with the new game, originally what was going to be FM25, what's happening, how are things going. All I can envisage is, and this is conjecture, but I'm presuming there was a comms person there, they're there, everything's going, and then suddenly something was sort of either just stopped, and there was something that happened behind closed doors, presumably with this whole like, this game's not going to get out on time, blah blah blah, and I think there must have been a breakdown of communication between the people who have made the decision, and then the people who are making the game and talking about the game, communicating out of it. And I think since then, you say what the strategy is. I don't think there has been a strategy. And I think what we're seeing now, I was just literally just today in preparation for this conversation, I did my prep work. I was just looking up again at like the Instagram of Football Manager. And they're now beginning to post. So they're not posting anything about updates to the game. They're not posting anything about glitches or this is what you're going to do or there's a new update being, a new patch has been released. On the social media, there's nothing of that. All it is now is, oh, look at these. There's these Premier League players. They could be great wonder kids in your save. And it's very front facing, very non-transparent at all, because they're not talking about the people who are making the game or the game itself. You're not having Miles going, there are this million people who are playing it right now, and even stats like that, you're not hearing that. It almost feels like there's a sort of facade being put up of like, let's just put something out there because we don't know how to handle what's going on at the minute.
They've obviously, you hear them talk about, you've heard Miles talk about, they've split their audience into different segments, which is a good thing to do, and they talk about this kind of hardcore. But they've kind of been a little bit I would say, disrespectful about that. Like, I guess they've braced themselves for this was going to be a rocky road, and I think maybe it's been worse than they anticipated.
Yes.
And they've sort of said, well, we're going to get criticism from this group. And they've tried to siphon that off. So with the forum posts, and they've set up, I don't know if you've noticed, they set up a new Twitter, which is called like S Support or something. And that's where they've been posting about the updates and about reporting. So they sort of say we're going to keep this corporate facade of Sports Interactive and Football Manager, and that's going to sort of pretend everything's great and be about marketing. And then they've got this separate channel, which is kind of always where they've fallen back on, isn't it? They've always sort of been like, oh, you've got any thoughts about the game, put it on our forum, which I've always felt was very antiquated. You know, you've got all of these other companies that are employing people to look at Reddit and to engage with content creators, and they had that role that Holly was in for a little while doing that. And then they didn't replace her when she left, and they sort of, again, going back to that change in approach in the sort of I would say about 2020 is where it felt like it shifted. They had that change of approach of engaging and seeing these audiences and reaching out to them. And then they've kind of returned to form in Crisis and said, actually, the only channels we care about are our own forum. We're not going to try and manage the message particularly well. We're going to sort of not. They've kind of issued an apology, but from a mod on a forum post rather than from the company itself. I don't know.
I think I just wonder whether there's, like I was saying, I think there's been that breakdown, probably not just with their comms team, with this sort of key decision makers there, but probably I can only envisage that the culture must feel very fractured working there. And as a comms person, when you're in an environment where you don't really know what you're allowed to say, what you're supposed to say, what the key messages you're trying to get out, are we trying to, if you're a comms person, are you thinking, am I trying to defend the game here? Am I just trying to ignore the issues here? I'm not convinced they've been told anything. FAQ, and so I think that must feel incredibly hard. This, you're saying earlier, we're not here to bash them. I feel sorry for them, because I'm like, that comms person is probably thinking like, I don't know what to say. Am I all right posting this? Can we?
Whoever's in charge of their social media or whatever,
yeah, you just feel so. I feel for them, and until there's a clear strategy and a kind of an opening of the doors internally, I'm not even talking about us as consumers of the game. I think there's probably got to be like an opening of internalized conversation to go, right, what are we going to do? And that might take a good year or so. I think that's going to take a good year, and it's going to need a better game, and that might help, because it might settle everyone to go, okay, well, what is our comms? But it's been painful the way they have handled the crisis of it, in my opinion.
Really hard to watch.
Oh yes, it has, and like almost outside of, like we could, like we were saying before we started recording, parking like our actual opinions of the game, purely the communication of the way that they've handled the delay and then the cancellation and then the putting out the game and all that. Well, it's just been painful. just yes, really, really painful. And
There's obviously constraints that they're under from Sega. You know, they spoke about how they wanted to share that the game had been cancelled earlier, but they couldn't say anything because they didn't want to affect the stock prices and all that, which I think is a legitimate constraint you might be under. I still don't quite understand why they chose in that time period to do nothing, because there was a point where I wondered whether this studio was going to dissolve, like, because it was giving off some pretty, like, when you don't post anything on any of your social media for 3 months and that goes past the point you were supposed to release a game,
yeah,
you do think, like, God, what is going on? And then they sort of, at least they did come out and say, yeah, we would have said something, but we weren't in a position to do so. But this is where it feels a bit whiplashy. Like, sometimes they're like, we don't want to show you behind the curtain, and then they sort of have this moment where they half pull it open and then they close it again. I think in part it seems to me that their strategy over many, many years has been, going back to that kind of marketing versus stakeholder approach, is that they've weighted a lot of their comms around just marketing the game. So you'll see that they don't really do a lot of community engagement until they've got stuff to share, and then they share it. So that machine churns up. Again, I don't know if this is a budget thing, or maybe they bring in an external company to do the marketing when they get close to the game, and then they can't afford or don't see the benefit in paying for that company to do it in the off season. But you can see they ramp up and then they drop down. And it's almost like they haven't had enough resource to handle this problem, like, because what I would have expected to see or hoped to see would be like ongoing communications. They didn't have to talk about FM25. They could have continued to talk about FM24, or talked about kind of evergreen content. What's your best stave of the past 10 years? They could have continued to engage, but actually I think they did almost as much damage to their relationship with the community from that period of blackout than they didn't do anything to build any kind of relationship to then fall back on, and then they sort of pretended, which I think they probably absolutely had to do for contractual reasons, pretended this game was going to be great, hyped everyone up, and then it was rubbish, and they will have known it was rubbish, but they would have been under pressure to release, they would have been under pressure to get sales. So I kind of can empathise, but they didn't take people on the journey. They didn't, all of these issues with Unity. They could have done dev diaries. They could have. Why not have interviews and someone sit there and show you how they're trying to move stuff over and talk about it from the perspective of a human being, saying, "Oh yeah, I'm used to working with the old engine. I'm actually having a really hard time with the new engine. But look, this is what we've got it to do."
Yeah.
So that people, because also I think there's a lot of ignorance out there. There's a lot of people going, "Well, they've had all this time on the game," and it's like, no, this was hard, and they clearly struggled.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah. Ultimately, it feels to me that like trust has been broken a bit, because before this, I think there was a sense of like people would say it all the time, how kind of Miles is very open, and he would talk about real life things and real life people, and was quite open, he's open and kind of communicative on social media and things like that. And I think that over time built trust in the people, and I think particularly those of us who would call ourselves core fans or whatever would feel like we almost like there's SI, but we very quickly jump to also the people who are working in SI, and that's because we had a sort of trust in them. But trust is built up over a long period of time, but it can be demolished really, really quickly. And I think actually what's happened is that silence has basically brought that trust down, and people have lost trust in Sports Interactive. I think people have lost trust maybe and are feeling more distanced from the people that work at Sports Interactive now, even if you didn't know the names. I know there's people that we would be able to name, certain people who work at Sports Interactive, and they're great people. But like we're almost beginning to now distance ourselves from the people who work at Sports Interactive and Sports Interactive as an organisation. As we think of Sports Interactive as an organisation, our trust is really low now. And so to the point where we're like, well, I don't know if FM27 is going to be any good. I'm not sure whether what they're gonna release now for FM26, and it's a real shame, because they, unlike most games and gaming manufacturers who never had that trust ever, they're relying solely on the quality of their game. Sports Interactive had that trust and the quality of game and that kind of depth of investment from the people, but they're losing that trust, and it's like, oh, it's really sad. I was thinking about GTA as well, and GTA. Obviously, I'm not a core fan of GTA. I've played them all. I still remember the original Bird's Eye View GTAs. Oh, that was amazing, by the way. They were glory days of GTA. But anyway, the trust with GTA is the quality of the game rather than the personability of them as a group, right? You Red Dead 2, incredible game. You know, all the Grand Theft Autos, amazing games. So when they've come out and said it's going to be a delay, yes, people are kicking up a bit of a stink, but there's actually still a trust that we know we're going to get an incredible game when it comes out. That's the feeling, at least, you know. Whereas now, I'm not sure Sports Interactive have got that with Football Manager anymore.
I think they've ruined their brand, is my kind of really damning take. Because when I look at particularly the discourse on Reddit, where anybody who's defending Sports Interactive even a little bit is getting responded with sort of memes of sort of fedora blokes with neck beards, don't defend this multinational corporation. But I think Sports Interactive isn't a multinational corporation, though. Like, I think they cut themselves a lot of slack by having this sense of we're all in it together. They rely on volunteers to update their database. You know, they are a small studio, and
they are,
gave
yeah,
them a lot of credit, and people felt part of that. And as a result, and because it didn't feel like they were, you know, because they didn't do DLC and all of this stuff, they didn't do loot boxes. It felt like there was an old-fashionedness to it. There was a trust to it. It was just a bunch of guys and girls or whatever that were working as hard as they could. A small kind of indie studio, and they've outgrown that, but they probably could have done better at trying to retain some of that in their brand. And it's interesting to hear the likes of, you know, your influencers, your sort of narrative setters within the community, like Benji and Zealand and others, saying, I'm not going to pretend that this company I'm sick of the bullshit of pretending that this company is different to any other video game company. You know, they opened pre-orders for FM25 when they knew they weren't going to release it. They've now been forced to release FM26 when they knew damn well it wasn't complete. And so all of this sense of this small studio, and we feel part of that community, and they've, through not talking to us, they've made us feel not part of that community, and then through their behaviour and their actions, they've meant that everybody has now started to judge them, not by the standards of a small indie studio that we're supporting, but by the standards of AAA gaming industry. There's a lot of rage there about that sector generally, and there's a lot of things that you can't get away with if you're in that space and you're not in the one of us kind of space, you know, part of the indie kind of. It's
interesting that the whole, you know, some of those poor decisions that ended up coming out, like the pre-orders. You know, I'd forgotten about the pre-orders. I'd forgotten about that whole saga. You think, oh goodness, like I remember thinking at the time, I think this is partly due to I wonder whether it was a lot of the staff working on autopilot. We do this thing every year, so we're just going to carry on doing everything that we do every year until someone tells me to stop. And that's again where I think that communication was broken down internally for someone to early enough go, hold on, things aren't right. We can't carry on doing the same things that we normally do. You know, pause pre-orders, pause this, don't let that contract go through. We can't afford to do this because it's not ready. And I don't think that happened. So for me, like, I think, you know, some people kicked off about the pre-orders saying like, oh, they're terrible, I can't believe they did that. I don't think they did it purposely. I think somebody probably just hit the auto cue button of going, well, yeah, this is what we do. So, okay.
That's probably, and that's the sense I've kind of got, is that they've really struggled with the changeover, both the changeover in terms of they've almost kind of maybe grown too quickly. Like they're trying to do games that work on all these platforms. I mean, stuff like, again, like I my main feeling is kind of sympathy. Like the fact that they weren't able to release an update on the day the game released, you know, like an actual release day patch, because it just balls that up basically, didn't they? They messed up the timing of that, and from what they said, it looked like in this statement that came out later, it looked like basically they'd either not got it in on time, or Steam only accepted a certain number of revisions, or I don't know what the reason was, but basically they were like, we missed the deadline for that. and we had to focus on harmonizing it with console or whatever, I feel as if, the change to Unity, the growth of the game, all the licenses. I mean, that's another thing. Like, they have hinted at times that they've not been able to announce stuff because they've had to clear it with all the license holders. They've got Sega on their back that's presumably like, stuff like you've seen.
Yeah.
I mean, FM26, they presumably committed to releasing it on the day that they did, months out. And then there have been some people sweating in the knowledge that that was a mistake. That actually, it was all well and good when it was 6 months down the line to say we would definitely be done by this day, but they definitely weren't done by that day. But there was no way they could delay again.
They could not have delayed that again.
They had to
just
watch that train coming towards them and do nothing.
Goodness, if they had done that, I dread to think what the impact of that would have been.
But again, it's about that reservoir of. That's the other thing. I mean, I mentioned this with G&G on the last podcast episode, that Football Manager is such a complicated game. And if you think about when you get a new finance system or a HR system, or you get a new customer relationship system or whatever in a workplace, you go through training programs, you could go through there's a whole internal comm strategy for the rollout of that, of like, you're not going to be able to find the things in the same place as they are, but let us talk you through where you might find them. And again, they sort of just dropped it on us and went, it'll take you 40 hours to work it out, bye, good luck. Like, where was the like Football Manager Twitch channel doing 24-hour live streams to answer questions or to click you through or show you? Where's you could have paid content creators to do videos, or you could have encouraged them to do videos, which they have now started to do off their own back. And maybe that's what they figured, well, they'll just do it anyway. But of like, this is how you find this now, or this is the reason behind this change. Like, where's the interview with some of the people involved in the game design who are saying, we made this decision for this reason? It's not there. They've just thrown it on the table. They've said nothing for 6 months, thrown it on the table, and then hidden.
Yeah.
Oh my god! Like,
yeah.
What are you doing?
Guessing. I can only imagine they just are out of time, and they haven't had capacity to consider this.
Looks like kind of what you said about comms people being the heart of the decision making. I don't think strategic communication is high up enough in the organisation and resourced enough. I do honestly believe that this crisis that they're experiencing now would be half as bad if they had taken us on the journey, they had consistent messaging, they had a clear approach. They could have done a lot of damage limitation by trying to control expectations, by having that longer view. They actually got some really good PR, but the PR was all centered on Miles, and then it has just landed in the worst possible way, because a GQ article with Miles is great PR, but for that to come after the game's been released and have statements in it about we were polishing a turd and now we're polishing a diamond, while you're sitting on like the 6th worst reviewed game ever on Steam, it's just complete loss of.
Oof. Yes.
In isolation, great job, but like as part of that picture.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just so unfortunate.
Yeah. You said earlier about kind of the resourcing. I think lack of resource, I think, is a bit of an issue when it comes to the comms. And you mentioned about their kind of marketing for the new game, and I think you're right. I think I would be 95% sure they pay an external group to create their marketing for each game each year, which is why we see that kind of like flashy stuff coming up when the game gets released, and then it really, really dumbs down to simplify of infographics and stuff like that we see, rather than anything magic. But I think the impact of that is that there's not then necessarily that consistency of quality throughout the year of strategy and also content that's attached to that. And so I've got a question for you, JM. You mentioned about like you said the brand is ruined. Do you think it's salvageable?
I mean, I think I've been on for some of the charities I've worked for, we have done unpopular things with certain people. Like, we've waded into issues where you will make enemies, right? So an example is you take an ethical stand on something, right? So you are going to, good job this podcast isn't monetized, but for example, if you issue a position statement on Israel-Palestine, right, which I have been part of charities that have done that, they've said, we stand with this group of people, you are going to get a deluge of bad stuff, and then you also get a lot of people who are going to come to you and be like, I don't know why you said it in that way, I don't know why you did that. Or if you take a decision like to close a venue or open a venue or to redo away something that you've done, you'll get a whole deluge of stuff. And the thing that I would always say internally is actually the worst thing is apathy, and criticism, engaged criticism, is a sign of interest. It's a sign of people care. Like, it's, you know, the whatever that phrase is, you know, the opposite of love isn't hate or whatever. Like, it's apathy, and they have a whole bank of people who care passionately about how this game is rubbish, which is better than a whole group of people that have completely disengaged.
Very true. So true.
So they have something there.
Yeah.
I also think too much of their brand is centered around Miles. You talked about him building trust, which I think he has. He's also alienated people, but it's been a bit of a one-man band. And I think they need to probably build up a bigger network of people who are happy to share their you know, again, like that kind of dev diary type stuff, or just people sharing their approach, or just more transparency. I think if they acknowledge, I mean, it's only like, how many apologies can you issue before people just call it bullshit? But I think what people want now is action. So they want to see. So if they do continue to update FN26 and they then do take an approach where they're more transparent and they talk about what they're doing to improve it for FN27 in the interim. I mean, loads of other game studios do this, where they'll do like they'll share the work they're developing, and they'll say, we don't actually know. I mean, it's interesting because Paradox get a lot of grief for their DLC behavior and all sorts, but they do this brilliant thing, particularly with their games like Crusader Kings or EU4 or whatever, where, I mean, the Crusader Kings patch that came out, the DLC that came out with China, was brilliant because they kept showing them building the map in China, and they would say, have you got any feedback? And then they would come back 3 weeks later and go, yeah, we've had some comments and we've realised that actually we've not quite drawn this province right, or we've had somebody from, community member from Indonesia point out that actually, like, that's not quite right, so we've made that improvement. And it's that evidence of not only are you sharing, but you're listening. And I don't see why Football Manager couldn't do that. It could be like, oh, this is what we're thinking we're going to do to the training screen for FN27. Can't implement it yet for FN26. This is very much a work in progress, but let us know what you think. And then they could come back and say, we had a really good response to our video about the training over the last kind of month, and this is what it now looks like, and we've incorporated some of that feedback. And people go, wow, they're listening to us. Look, I can see the game is improving. This has given me the faith that I will go and buy 27.
Yeah, that's very true.
That requires resource, but I think that's what they can do to try and start to repair that trust and repair that brand, and also start to tell us some information. Be like, this is Bob, he works on this part of the game, there's only 4 other people that work on this part of the game, to kind of get that sense of scale again, and be like, if we had 20 people working on this part of the game, this is what we'd want to do, but actually with the number of hours we've got, we can only do this. You know, you could even do like a vote, like, I mean, this is a bit crazy, but you could do like, we've only got time to do this or this, you know, which do you think? Like Minecraft, where they do their mob votes.
Oh, right, yeah, okay.
3 mobs to the game, you vote for the one, we'll add it in. That kind of community engagement stuff that Sports Interactive just doesn't do any of that. I think some of that could start to build understanding of how the company's working, what constraints it's under, and make people feel like they're being listened to. And I think if they took that approach, I think it would go a long way, to be honest with you, to rebuilding it.
Yeah, good, it's a good shout. It's going to take time for them.
But yeah, there's no quick fix at all at this point.
And I think to a certain degree, a really excellent, amazing FM27 would be wonderful and would help, but that won't solve it. If I'm honest, I think I'm not saying, it will be great to have a much better FM27, obviously, but I think it takes time. Like I said earlier on, the trust takes time to build, and if it's been lost immediately, it's going to take time, and it's going to take small acts and small things and regular, consistent behaviors and values being shown and all that kind of thing, and conversations that are open and transparency and honesty in it as well. So we begin to go, oh, I can trust this group again. I do think there's a new era coming with Football Manager. You know, if they're heading into more console stuff, then I'm a bit like, well, that's fine. If that's what they're going to do, that's fine. But it will still require them to build that trust anyway, regardless of what direction they're going in. They still need to build that trust.
If they're going to move into that space, as I said, they're going to be in that space with those other types of sort of strategy role-playing games. They're not going to be in Call of Duty type space. Like, they're still going to have to. That's the the community is, even on the console, is going to be people who are, quite detail focused, obsessive, probably don't like change.
Just telling my life story,
but
it's true though. It's true. Yeah.
I mean, you can have broader conversations about like they're trying to please all these different groups, and they've obviously made. I think the other thing that I find confusing is this idea that we're not going to bring the hardcore with us, and we're going to just live with that. And instead of seeing those people as your core ambassador group, your kind of narrative setting group, I know multiple people that buy the game every other year, every third year, and they're like asking me, is it worth buying or whatever? And I think they're maybe underestimating their marketing budget can't be that big. So I think they're underestimating that this core is actually then what drives the rest of it. That actually they've got a tricky. It's a navigating that is really tricky. How do you keep the old people happy whilst bringing new people in? And I work for a non-profit, and that's for all charities. That's the way. You've got all these people who have been supporting the charity and the values of that group for decades, and they don't like change. And then but that charity cannot survive if they're purely putting their attention into the old people. Even if they may be boomers with all the money, they need to bring in the young people. And to navigate, I don't know the answers to that, other than it's really, really hard. And I probably agree with you. As I'm not quite a boomer, but as somebody who's been into Football Manager for decades, I'm probably of that older crowd. It does feel a little bit there like, whatever, stuff for you guys. That's what it's felt like a little bit as a consumer in that sense. That is a hard job for them to do. But again, I think they could learn from. I think they, to some extent, don't know what they are, because they sit in this weird crossroads of sort of video games, sports, and then I do think they kind of sit in that charity space, because I think a lot of what they rely on is that kind of goodwill and that community. And that kind of
like you say, because they're not a big AAA, whatever you called it, AAA gaming sort of group.
I do wonder if some of the advice they've had hasn't been the best, because it's sort of been, well, don't worry about it, just worry about, just do a slick marketing campaign and you'll be fine, or, I don't know, just the best thing is to say nothing. But I don't know, maybe this is just the school of comms I come from, but I think that's such a bad idea. I think
it's a bad idea.
You seed all of the ground.
Yes.
The other thing I would say is, don't do it at this stage they're in now. Don't do anything crazy. Like, people calling for like resignations and big gestures. I think that's not going to solve it. Like, it's actually just a more steady level approach, a kind of, let's reset, let's go from here, what do we do, what's our strategy? And my advice to them would be, I think are similar to what we would say, is like, actually take this seriously, resource it, and come up with a 6 month, 18 months, 4-year plan for how you build that trust.
So true, because I think if they were to start making big decisions based on the reaction to this game on a whim, and suddenly, just like you say, big gestures, that would just be a nightmare for them. I this is just speculation. I wonder whether there are some big things that may come in the next year with them, but I'm not convinced that will be because of the consumer reaction to this game, if I'm honest. I think there's probably lots of things that we don't know about, lots of things that are going on behind the curtain, and you wonder whether there may be some big shifts to come.
At the moment is, and I think it's legitimate. I get frustrated with it, particularly when it crosses the line, and I'm not in that angry space. But it's kind of hard to place. Like, people just seem to be really angry, but they don't even. There's no end game to that community anger. Like, we're gonna punish them, and then what? Like, do you want like Miles to get sacked, and then you'll feel better, or do you want the studio to go under, and you'll like, what's your end game here? You clearly are upset. You clearly care about this game. And it just feels like, I've been joking a little bit about pitchforks, so kind of mob riot, but that's kind of how it feels. People are just mad and they want to put that anger somewhere. And I don't think there's also a clear sense of direction from the community in terms of like, if they just need to do this, which is kind of where I think the like grand gestures doesn't really work, because it's not like this one thing they need to fix. Like,
it's true.
They've tripled the price of the game and they just need to put it back to the old price. It's just a kind of general anger.
Yeah, general dissatisfaction, isn't it? And a general annoyance. It's very true. Very true.
So having said all that, you, according to my Steam, have hundreds of hours on the game. I don't know whether that's a glitch. Do you have an opinion on the game?
Yeah, my Steam is saying 157 hours, which is definitely not the case. I've definitely played it a fair bit, but definitely not that much. Yeah, in general, probably nothing new from what has basically been said already, in complete honesty. So sorry to be boring. I've got no huge insights with this. I think, yes, I found the UI really hard to navigate around, and it's taken me ages to find things. And then you're stumbling into little moments of like, oh, there's no that anymore. Oh, that's not there anymore, which is, it's not a game breaker for me. A lot of those things. I think, people talk about the shouts, and probably that the shouts has been the one thing that's, as I'm playing it more, I'm realizing, oh, that is a real change. It's a lot more spectatory. If that's the word. You know what I mean? It's just a lot more like watching the game rather than really participating in the first half of most matches, I'd say. I do feel like there's some real positives about it. I do really enjoy the matchday experience. And if honesty, I quite enjoy watching and just spectating the game because I think it looks good. And so I'm like, oh, this is all right. This is nice to watch. I find it really hard. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm finding it really hard. I'm not much of a tactician anyway. Having to double up and do an in and out of possession is not easy for me, but I'm just finding the game quite tricky. But I'm going to keep playing it. I start playing it and I'm enjoying it. And the thing that makes me turn it off is because I'm getting old and I can't stay up too late these days. I think that, you know what I mean? I think that's really where I am. So as I said, nothing new from me to add other than mostly agreeing with what most people are saying about the game. What's really amusing, I think, is I was thinking back to FM24, and it's not until now that I am realising how good FM24 was. And before FM24 came out, I think everyone was going to be like, well, it's not going to be that good because FM25 is going to be amazing. How wrong we were. Oh yes, that's probably where I'm at with it. I'm doing a Spurs women's save. I'm enjoying seeing the effort they've put into the animations of the women playing football. I think that is spot on, actually. I think that's really good shout, because they didn't need to do that. They did need to do that, really, but they might not have done that. But actually, it just looks great. It looks really good. So yeah. How about you?
Yeah, similar. I would say it's it's not the kind of comfort of that UI that you're used to, that UX user experience. Kind of, you're just sitting there on your laptop. You know where everything is. You're just clicking through screens. Like it's a very different experience, and it has pros and it has cons. I'm kind of just letting it sit in the background and slowly get patched and improved. And then kind of, I do wonder if when push comes to shove, most people are still playing it, and most of the people I've seen are still playing it. Even people who've sort of said they're not playing it, I can see on Steam that they're still playing it. So I wonder if to some extent, when the dust settles and we move on, it will feel less dramatic as it felt in the moment.
I think so.
We'll see.
I think so.
I think G&G hit on something when I was speaking to him about, and I was just asking him his opinions on the game, which is that ultimately what we remember is like, I won this trophy, or this new gen came through that was great, or it's the narrative, it's the stories, and we may be having to work a bit harder to dig that out, but that's still there. You don't look back at a save from 10 years ago from now and go, gosh, I really didn't like the way it showed the attributes. You know, I remember this event.
It's true. It's really true. Yeah, a bit of perspective.
Maybe. But for some people, they've just, you know, it's too much and they've given up, or they've gone back to older games, and that might also be okay. You know,
when you've worked somewhere for a long time, and somebody new comes in to be a new colleague, and they either change things up or they do something different, and then they make mistakes in what they've done. In your head, you're being like, why have you changed it? It was working fine. That person who did it before, they did it a great job. And it feels a little bit like that issues that have been resolved, it's almost like some of it has gone back and it's now a bit of a problem again. And you're like, oh, this is weird. Like, my manager keeps changing his appearance. And just things like that. And you're like, I thought they sorted that a couple of years ago.
But then to look back round, they're in a completely different engine. So they're going to have to re-sort it.
I know, exactly. And that's why these things are going to happen. And so
I don't know if they've prepared people enough for that.
No, and that's
like, I mean, yeah, we've treaded this ground, but even with all of the time they've taken to handle this handover, it's still so much less time than polishing something since whenever it was, 2000 and whatever. Like, it's still, they had so many years to polish FM24 but I think they're then also internally probably using that as an excuse to be like, oh, it's not that bad, it's just, you know, but actually it's kind of worse than just a bit of polish. So my question for people, if they're watching this on YouTube, is what would you need to kind of restore your trust in Sports Interactive? And kind of a one-liner from you, Pokes, what would you do?
It needs to be lots of little, consistent, authentic steps. That's what it needs to be.
Beautiful. And if people want to view your past content or potential future content, where can they go?
Well, yeah, jump onto Twitch. I mean, I am jumping into people's chats, so you can probably see me in people's chats at the minute. And who knows? I always said that this year I was going to not stream, and we're recording this in November. So at some point we're coming to the end, and there's probably been a bit of a equivalent of an SI blackout of comms from me.
You're a hypocrite.
I'm a hypocrite. Oh, what have I done? So I probably need to make some sort of decision at some point about what I'm going to do. But yes, I'm on Twitch, PokesFM, on YouTube. You can search me on YouTube, and there's some YouTube videos over there as well. I've abandoned Twitter these days, so I'm not on there. But you can be on Blue Sky. I'm on there, pottering about. Mainly watching other people's little messages on there. So yeah.
No. Well, fingers crossed still for maybe a fortnightly stream from you at some point.
Maybe. We'll see. We'll see.
But thank you so much for bringing your insights and your wonderful gravitas to the podcast. It's a pleasure. And
it's great to chat.
People will have found it interesting.
Thank you for having me. You're an absolute hero, Jay. I'm glad to see this podcast is back as well. So make sure you like and subscribe, leave a comment below, send this to your friends, etc. And yeah.
That'll do it now. Doubled audience. Well, doubling the audience is a bit of a stretch, but if you did enjoy this podcast, please do share it with a friend. I thought that was a really interesting interview. I think Pokes had a lot to bring to that. I think it's a really important topic that I've not seen discussed. We've had the round tables sort of about 12 to 24 hours before this was released. Dr. Benji did another one with Lelujo and Work the Space and Zealand, but that idea of the communications, the professional, kind of having that professional take, I think adds something to that conversation. We're going to be moving away from dissecting FM26 for the rest of this season. We may dip into it, but the focus now is to move on. But I think those 2 episodes hopefully have created a bit of space to have a conversation. I appreciate your support as always. If you've listened all the way to this end section with the funky kind of jazz element of the podcast, you are a loyal listener, and I appreciate that very much. And I hope that you will enjoy the continuation of this series and the return of the podcast. I am always thankful, and I hope that you have a wonderful rest of the week, and that I see you in the comments or on the listener numbers, on the streams in the coming weeks. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.